Hi guys, I'm talking about The Emigrants by Sebald, or attempting to talk about it. So this is a literary text, so the philosophy contained within it isn't as obvious as most of the other stuff, or many of the other stuff we did in the sixth section, but some of the major ideas to look at is how memory is represented in it, specifically in relation to Freud. So basically the way Freud understands melancholy and mourning, which are two of the main topics, I guess, in The Emigrants, is Freud understands once a traumatic event happens, or a tragic event, or like the death of somebody happens, the natural process one goes through is mourning. Now mourning is a set period of time where one breaks the connections with the person lost, or the thing lost, or the, say, geographical place lost, and goes through the process of mourning to sever those ties, so that at the end of the mourning period they're able to recreate ties, and what was lost is kind of forgotten and sinks into the past. So what melancholy is, Freud says, is it's the inability to just give up what has been lost. Now Freud thinks of this as a sort of sickness. It's basically mourning gone wrong. Mourning is a healthy thing, and melancholy is the sick, pathological, I guess, result of an inability to actually enter into a mourning process. Now Sebald approaches melancholy in a very different way. Kind of the mood that pervades the whole text is a very melancholic text, or melancholic mood. And what he's trying to point to, at least according to Sarah Cliff's lecture, is that melancholy is not so much a sickness and a kind of mourning gone wrong. More, melancholy is a natural response to the kind of trauma that you see the characters undergoing. And it's a very natural, and it is the only response. So basically what it is you see through their lives, they have this inability to connect with society again, this inability to integrate themselves in, to form new geographical attachment to their new homes that they've been displaced from, an inability to connect with people. And so this all kind of stems from this natural melancholy that each one undergoes after the trauma of specifically displacement from Germany, the Holocaust, various things like that. So that's one of the major ideas. Another thing about it is...
Go ahead.
Another thing about it is this idea that melancholy, because it doesn't have a definitive end point like mourning does, it isn't necessarily tied to a specific subject. Whereas mourning, it would simply be, I, Mark, am the one who is mourning, say, the loss of my parents. And then I'd feel sad, it would come to an end. Because melancholy is kind of this more pervasive thing that runs throughout the individual, but also can go beyond the individual into this thing called post-memory. And so what the concept of post-memory is post-memory is the memory of an event pervading one's life, even if they didn't actually directly experience that event. So for a perfect example is, say, your parents got interned in a prison camp during the Second World War. Neither of them were killed, so it doesn't have a direct correspondence to you as an individual, and yet you still live with some of the traumatic, I guess, effects of their memories, even though you didn't directly experience them yourselves. So that's the idea of post-memory, and the reason, and what melancholy does is, because melancholy isn't, I guess, attached to a single subject. Melancholy has the tendency to work its way from the individual memory of one person into a sort of post-memory. So that's what we see with the narrator. What happens to the narrator throughout the text is the narrator actually becomes involved in the melancholy of the characters themselves. The melancholy isn't confined simply to the characters, but the author, or I should say the narrator, actually gets involved in the melancholy of the characters themselves. And this is seen even in the structure of the writing, which is this kind of very interesting, almost stream of conscious kind of narrative, where the first person, I, and the second person, he, is in a constant state of switching back and forth, even without, say, paragraph breaks or any actual distinction that the E or the I have changed, or sorry, the he or the I have changed. So the very style is reminiscent of the fact that the melancholy is able to move throughout memories, whether it's the person who experienced the trauma or whether it's the person, in the narrator's case, who's working with the trauma or trying to understand the trauma. So the very style is kind of reminiscent of the memories themselves, the movement of the memories. It's really, really quite beautiful. Yeah, I don't really know too much more to say other than, I guess the big concepts are melancholy in relation to Freud and how it's not for Sebald a kind of sickness and a kind of mourning gone wrong. It's a natural response to that kind of trauma. And the second idea is post-memory. And I guess kind of the narrative push of the book is how the melancholy which pervades all the images in the text, from the falling down cities to the broken garden, how that kind of works its way into the narrator himself and into the post-memory of the narrator. So that's kind of a little tidbit of Sebald.